Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, looking ahead to the upcoming triple header and discussing some of the big talking points that came out of the recent triple header in the Americas. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Absolutely Coop, and the man, the myth, the legend, lead editor, Ian Parks. You know what, we're keeping it because I quite like it now. So just stuck with that you're stuck with that for the rest of the season. Over the winter break, I could then think of some new nicknames. Gentlemen, there's no race to discuss. Obviously, looking ahead to this weekend, it is another week off, and I think one which is much needed for all the teams after what was a demanding and grueling triple header with storylines throughout. And obviously one of the biggest storylines came in Sao Paulo with Max Verstappen recovering from 17th on the grid to win, extending his lead over Lando Norris to 62 points. Max can now win the driver's title in Las Vegas should Lando score no more than, well, basically Lando needs to score 4 points or more than Verstappen to ensure the title is not claimed in Sin City, but it's a very good chance it will be. Coming out of Sao Paulo and in last week and over the weekend, there's obviously been lots of comments ranking Verstappen's victory in Sao Paulo because it was from 17th on the grid, which is pretty extraordinary. Some saying it is the best drive ever in F1. Some saying one of the best. Red Bull team principal Christian Horner said that it was, he compared it to Ayrton Senna's Lap of the Gods in Donington Park in 1993. Ian, for those watching on YouTube, we'll see you shaking your head then. For you, where do you rank Max's win? Because it was spectacular.
Look, yeah, absolutely. It was. Oh, there we go. I've used Sam's word. Sorry, Sam. I've taken your word. I've gone straight away.
I'm absolved.
Absolutely, you are absolved. It's me nipping in there with the word absolutely. Sorry, folks. Sorry, Sam. Look, for me, it was Max's best drive of his career. Was it the best drive in Formula One? No. I think it was a great wet weather drive, and we waxed lyrical about it in our update after the race on Sunday and in our podcast on the Monday that followed the Brazilian Grand Prix, Sao Paulo Grand Prix. As I say, superlative drive from Max. It was, for me, his best of his F1 career, best of his 62 wins now that he's got. But as the best of F1, no. Ranks up there, yes, heavily alongside Ayrton Senna's 93 drive in the European Grand Prix at Donington. Then you got to look at other great wet weather drives as well. Michael Schumacher, 96 Spain, Lewis Hamilton, 2008 British Grand Prix. But then you've got to look at arguably for me, and we're going back a bit in time here, folks, for me, the best drive ever in the wet was by the great three-time champion, Sir Jackie Stewart, 1968 German Grand Prix. And here we're talking about the 14.2 mile, as it was then, Nordschleife circuit. It was conditions worse than what we saw at Sao Paulo on the basis of the fact that there was a fog. There was fog throughout that race. And these drivers could barely see 60, 70, 80 meters in front of them, never mind going around in the wet as well. And this is the Nordschleife, rated Green Hell, rated as one of the most difficult circuits ever to appear in Formula One. And here were these guys in the cars back then, the late 60s machinery as they were, driving in hellish conditions, way, way worse than Sao Paulo. I mean, Jackie Stewart won that race by just over 4 minutes. He was driving a match at the time. And it was that kind of era, to give you some idea. And this is well documented, so it's not something that's new here that I'm giving. But his first words when he got out of the car were to his boss, Ken Tyrrell, who died. Because that just gives you some idea as to the machinery, the conditions, how Formula One was at that particular time, that particular era. Thankfully for Sir Jackie, just to answer that question, nobody did. So just quite remarkable performance in the wet. For me, that ranks right up there. It's probably the greatest driver in Formula One history. But Max, just to answer the question specifically, a superlative drive without a shadow of a doubt. And for me, Max's best drive of his career.
I completely agree. I think that was Max's greatest drive. I mean, I don't know if I can beat what you've just said about obviously Sir Jackie's performance. A little bit before my time, because I'm born in 1999. I think at
Before
least
my time, to be fair.
Well, I think for me at least, in my lifetime, I also don't think it was the greatest performance in F1 history, at least in my F1 history. For me, it's Jenson Button in similar conditions what we saw in Sao Paulo in Canada 2011, if I remember correctly, when he was last. And of course, Sebastian Vettel the last. For me, that was, in my lifetime, that's probably, I think, the best performance, and in my eyes, the best race that there's been. Sam, for you, where does
go along with
Max's...
race, Nick, absolutely. I'd go along with best race.
One of the longest as well, if I remember correctly, if not the longest, I think, actually. Yeah. Sam, for you, where does Max's performance in Sao Paulo rank?
It's certainly his best, in my opinion. I actually think, weirdly, because of how metronomically brilliant Max is and has been throughout much of the last few years, some of his wins don't kind of rank, they don't register, they don't rank that highly in kind of thinking, because you go, well, that's just Max being Max. You almost don't appreciate the brilliance in the moment of some of those wins because he makes it look so effortless. I think it's one of those situations where I was kind of looking back through his kind of 62 and I was thinking, there's so many of these I just do not remember. I can't recall a specific race or so on and so forth. So yeah, I think it's as far as I can remember, his best win. It was absolutely fantastic. As for best ever in F1, I think that's recency bias talking to a large extent. But there's also the fact that the best drive in F1 history might not necessarily be the best win in F1 history.
I know where he's going. I know exactly what he's going to say. Go on.
Because there's stuff like, and I mean, the obvious and easy example is Senna, Monaco 1984 in a Tolman. Like, had that race been a lap longer, or
he would have passed.
He would have won. Yeah. So there's examples like that, or even the 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix, which Vettel won the title in. He fell to last on the fourth corner of the first lap and had to work his way back through the field. I can't even remember where he finished that race. I mean, awkward if he did actually win it. I don't think he did win it.
It was fifth or sixth, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It was kind of mid points, but enough to win the title.
Yeah.
So you've got all these different examples. It's almost like that kind of the overall greatest driver all the time debate. It's so difficult to kind of pinpoint. It's so subjective. Each era has their greats, but the eras are so defined and different that you could spend all day kind of trying to tease out those subtleties. So yeah, I don't think you can with ease say that's the best drive of all time. It is certainly a great drive, but you'd be here all day looking through the history books and watching highlights and remembering things to be able to kind of say anything with any certainty there. But yeah, for me, the one that jumped to mind was Senna in '84. But again, is that partly because Senna is so well trodden and his history in F1 is so kind of well versed? Yeah, I'm sure there's examples that I'm totally forgetting off the top of my head.
Regardless of where Max's win does rank amongst the all-time best drives, best victories, the most important thing is he had significantly extended his lead in the drivers' title race over Lando Norris. It's now 62 points with 3 races. And, he can win it in Las Vegas. It makes the Las Vegas Grand Prix that much more important. But more importantly, in my eyes, it heightens the pressure on McLaren so much. They've, to put it simply, bottled, in my eyes, the driver's title. They introduced team orders too late. They made strategic errors earlier in the season. McLaren, for the second half of the year, have had the best car by some margin compared to Red Bull, who really have been nowhere. It's been Max keeping that team alive. And what's fascinating now is Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal, has always said it's the constructors' title which has been the priority. And actually, it feels like they've gotten themselves a little bit worked up. And as I mentioned last week, I think it was sucked into the idea of winning the driver's title with Lando. And something really interesting to highlight, some of the mistakes that McLaren has made over the America's triple header, and actually the gains that Ferrari in particular have made just in the recent triple header alone. Ferrari scored 116 points. McLaren scored 77. Red Bull scored 69. So McLaren only scored 8 more than Red Bull, despite having a superior car, despite having 2 drivers who have performed consistently this season. Max Verstappen has been keeping Red Bull alive, and Ferrari, scoring 39 points more than McLaren over the triple header. Ferrari are only 36 points behind. If they replicate, it's easier said than done, but if they were to replicate what they did in the America's triple header in the final 3 races this season, Ferrari leave the season with the constructors' title. I'll come to you first in this, Ian, but do you think now McLaren have put themselves in a position where the pressure on them has never been greater, at least arguably since 1998?
I'm actually going to turn the tables on you here, Nick.
Here we go. Come on, let's go.
Because you've made a couple of comments there, one of which I do agree with, where you said that McLaren got sucked into a driver's title battle. And for many respects, we all have. Unless you're, a dyed-in-the-wool Max fan.
Yeah.
We all have, because we all want that. We all want, the drivers' championship to go down to the wire. We want to be talking about the excitement, the intrigue. Can he do this? Can the chasing guy do that? The chasing guy's got to do this. The leading guy's got to do that. And it's all part of that expectancy, that heightened anticipation that we want around our championships. We want to keep talking with bullish enthusiasm about what might happen, what could happen, because that's where we, as media folks, and I say this wholeheartedly, that's what we want to give you guys. We want to give you an entertaining level of content, both in written form on our website and here as well when we're discussing stuff. We want to build things up. But so that's that perspective that, yes, we've got sucked into the Drivers' Championship battle. And of course we have, because as I said, we want that excitement. But the bit that really I'm intrigued about, Nick, where you said McLaren have bottled it, that's a strong term.
Okay, I'll back up my words. I honestly do believe that McLaren, and I'm going to double down, because I think they have bottled it. I think McLaren introduced papaya rules, which quite clearly didn't work. We saw what happened on the opening lap at Monza. That lost Lando the chance to win a race. He finished 3rd in the end. Obviously, Charles Leclerc then did both McLaren drivers. And for me, it's the problem that McLaren has made strategic errors as recently as Sao Paulo, of course, as did Mercedes. We'll call them out as well, in deciding to pit, under the VSC seconds before, a couple of laps before there was on the red flag, something which Alpine and Red Bull, a decision they both made correctly to not pit. And ultimately, as we saw in Sao Paulo, track position was vital. They've made strategic errors there. And again, going back to, races this season where they've not made the right calls at the right times. They've not given Lando preferential treatment, which could have seen him score more points and be closer to Max. But the thing that sticks out for me as well was actually, maybe it's harsh for me to say McLaren have bottled it. I think to a certain extent Lando has. He has the talent. He has the talent to be a world champion. I think that's clear. He has shown he's got the speed, he's got the raw ability, but for me, to become a world champion in F1 now, you need to have an edge over Max Verstappen. And I don't think Lando has that yet. That could be because of inexperience in fighting for a title. Very well, and it'll be interesting to see what happens next season. But we saw in Mexico City, Max played the rules to their absolute limit, and in terms of their battle, won. Of course, Mexico City was a different story. Max went beyond the limit, but again, that still hampered Lando, because it meant that Lando couldn't win in Mexico City, despite having actually better pace than Carlos Sainz. The big thing for Lando as well has been he has made crucial errors at the worst times. We saw multiple in Sao Paulo where Max did not put a wheel out of line. Lando, not for the first time this season, made a bad start from pole position. Something good to sign off former Haas team principal, which you mentioned as well on the Red Flags podcast. That actually had Lando in the races he started from pole and made a bad start, had he not made a bad start and actually remained in the lead, odds on in those races, he goes on to claim victory. That would have a significant difference in the points between him and Max. And the thing as well, when he did have the bad start in Sao Paulo and obviously tumbled down to sixth, got past George Russell for fifth, he still then went to make another mistake and, of course, went wide at the first corner following the second restart. And I think maybe it's gotten a little bit into his head with all the questions from the media regarding the title fight and battling Max. And we've seen, we saw what happened with Lewis in 2021. Of course, very different circumstances in Abu Dhabi, but forgetting Abu Dhabi for a moment, looking at the battles they had prior to that, it was quite clear that I don't think Lewis has experienced tension or an intensity to a battle like that with Max. Max is, an alien. He is an exceptional talent. And it takes an exceptional talent to not only match that, but beat it. And that's why I think next season is going to be so interesting, because McLaren should have a better car than Red Bull, unless Red Bull do a miracle. And it's going to be whether Lando can take the experience of battling Max this year and use that next year to go one step better and win the title. Do you think I've proven my point?
I've just heard the headline to this podcast. Max is an alien.
That's fine.
There we
go for it. But and of course, for those who are watching this podcast on YouTube, let us know your comments below on on what I've just said. And yeah, McLaren have had, and this is something I was actually writing about at the moment for Racing News 365, is come the end of the season, no matter whether McLaren win the title or not, they're going to have had an exceptional year given where they were in 2023. No doubt about that. But for me now, if McLaren don't win this Constructors, and who knows, Ferrari look very, very strong, would that then count as a failure for them? And that's the big thing, because they're in this position now where if it were, I think, Mercedes or Red Bull and they lost the lead McLaren have, would we be questioning that? I think probably yes. And I think it's no different. We need to be doing the same for McLaren, because ultimately they have the best car and yet they're still making errors. Similar to Ferrari at the start of 2022, where actually they started that season with a better car than Red Bull, but we saw the errors by the strategic team and by the drivers, and I think we're seeing something similar now. Go on, Sam. Make me stop talking for a little bit. Any points to add?
Yeah, I almost went for the A word there. If you look at the last triple header, I do think there's an element that Ferrari have maximised more often than not, whereas McLaren haven't really at all. In the balance of kind of just the ebb and flow of the season, it's still a massive task for Ferrari to match what they achieved in the previous triple header in the one that's coming over the next few weekends. So that, I think, McLaren will know that was the case, and they'll be able to correct things, and they'll be able to kind of look back at the previous three rounds and go, right, kind of where did things go wrong for us, or where did we actually fail to, as I said, maximise on what we should have achieved. But to your kind of wider point about bottling, it's punchy, as Ian, but
you've got question, Nick, on it.
And you've got to love a man who stands by his convictions. To
and I defended myself.
Fair play, exactly.
Absolutely.
And actually, I can add a further point, having done a bit of maths for this piece I'm doing. And what's really interesting, looking at, so McLaren have scored obviously 77 points across the last three races in the America's triple header. Sergio Perez, of course, has been nowhere for Red Bull. It's been Max fighting that charge. What's fascinating, and I thought this was really, really interesting, across the America's triple header, Oscar Piastri picked up 25 points, which works out at 8.3 points per round. And yes, okay, that's still more than Checo, but I think when you look at the car that they've got and the fact that actually Oscar went into the America's triple header on the back of 3 podiums, including 1 victory, to then have that and he has struggled. He endured a very difficult weekend in Texas. He endured a difficult weekend in Mexico City, obviously with a poor qualifying, and of course then struggled in Sao Paulo. So I think it's very interesting that it does feel like a little bit the tides are turning. But in the same case, Ferrari also struggled in Sao Paulo with Carlos obviously crashing twice. It feels a little bit like everything in that Constructors' title fight is very up in the balance, and actually because of that, it's up in the air for one of those 3 teams to grab an exceptional chance, Ian.
It's well.
Go on, Sam. Continue.
Finish
yeah,
my
go on.
initial
Sorry,
point.
I started rambling. Go for it.
I mean, you're absolutely right in terms of it feels like the momentum swings have been quite kind of like long, pronounced momentum swings that then go back. Much like the narrative around Oscar Piastri, he had a really strong few rounds, and then it's actually come back to kind of reality of this is still a second-year driver. But if you look back at even a comment I made, I think it was around the British Grand Prix on this podcast, I said that it feels like every time McLaren come up against a new scenario that the team in its current guise hasn't encountered before, it feels like they're making a mistake. It feels like they're not getting things right the first time as often as they'd need to really be in a championship fight, particularly when it comes to the driver's title. And obviously things have progressed and they are leading the Constructors' Championship. When it comes to the kind of psychological effects and the psychology of getting sucked into that driver's title fight, as you say, I think there has been an effect where they feel like they're chasing, and that has bred mistakes, as we saw in Brazil, in terms of the strategic errors. Whereas if they had maintained the thinking from we're ahead, we just need to kind of, the status quo will see us win the title. We need to just continue that trajectory. As I said, they needed to approach that triple header after Singapore of just, we need to do what we need to do. We can't worry about anyone else. I think the feeling around the team and the position they're in would probably be a little bit more optimistic than it is now, and especially in the outlook of this conversation. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting period because they've got to course correct going into this triple header. Because as you say, if you repeat the past three races again, Ferrari take the title. So they've got to course correct.
And the thing as well, a bit. Go on, Ian.
I was going to say, just going on about your earlier comments, which again, very well put. You backed up your comments, or you backed up your earlier comments that I made a point of with some, well-raised comments of your own. I think for me, I don't think they've bottled it. I think that's too strong a phrase, to be honest. I don't think there's been any element of bottling, because you've got to think that this is a driver and B, a team that are pretty much learning on the hoof here with regard to what it takes to competing in a drivers and constructors championship battle. McLaren hasn't won either for years. 2008 was the last drivers championship. 1998 was their last constructors championship. Everything has changed within that team since then. And you look at Red Bull and Max, and you look how many titles that team has won since even just McLaren's last title, which was, as I said, 08 Lewis, and it's won 6 constructors and 7 drivers titles. Yep, that's right. 6 constructors, 7, so 13 titles over that period of time since McLaren last won anything. So, of course, Red Bull has the upper hand. He knows what to do, where the pitfalls are, how to course correct just the smallest mistake. Whereas the same McLaren, it's pretty much, you've got a new team principal, if you think about it relatively, Andrea Stella. You've got a driver in Lando Norris competing for the first time, and also competing for the first time for a drivers' championship. And you got all those people behind Andrea, many of whom are relatively new faces that weren't there 16 years ago. So they're all, of course, there's going to be people brought in from other teams, and they will have had a good idea as to what it takes, of course. But overall, as a unit, as a group, as a team, this is McLaren embarking on something completely different. So I think there's going to be a huge learning curve for McLaren. And regardless of what happens at the end of this season, they will take an enormous amount out of it. Lando will take an enormous amount out of it, because the difference between Lando and Max, and just drawing to them specifically, is you look back on Max this season, it's very hard to pinpoint where a result might have got away from him, where he could have maybe scored a few points extra. Very, very few. He's barely pulled a wheel out of place all season. And then you look at Lando, and yes, the mistakes he has made, even when he was leading, which is one of the biggest points, the Singapore Grand Prix, comfortable. Probably that's where McLaren has been at its best at any race this season. Comfortable Grand Prix, and yet he still almost put that car in the wall, not once but twice, when he's got a car which had that pace advantage. So he still has a lot to learn. McLaren still has a lot to learn in terms of, as we've discussed, strategy. So going into these last three races, whilst the driver's title now has certainly ebbed away, bar some almighty catastrophe befalling Max Verstappen over these last three Grand Prix, this triple header.
Yeah.
McLaren, I think, going into this triple header, will have learned an awful lot about the last triple header. Yeah. I still think they'll get over the line. They've got a 36-point cushion, and basically what would have to happen in those three races would have to be replicated what happened in the previous three with regard to Ferrari and McLaren. And I do not see McLaren replicating its errors, shall we say, from what's gone previously in the last triple header. I think, particularly with Andrea as team principal and the way he works and operates and the way he gets his team functioning, we're going to see McLaren get over the line with this constructors title. I think they're going to have the edge just on Ferrari.
Okay, I'm going to deliver a bold prediction then now, because I think Ferrari win it. I do. I really do. But the thing that's really interesting, and I want to build on that point you just made, Ian, and actually ask you a question back, because obviously we've discussed and Sam, you raised it as well, whilst McLaren are an incredibly experienced team, incredibly successful, the actual team they've got there now is actually quite inexperienced in fighting for a title. Do you think it's fair to say, actually, it's a similar argument for Ferrari? Because whilst their last constructors title obviously was 2008, a decade on from McLaren's most recent one. But actually, Ferrari have gone under numerous leadership changes. There's been a lot of personnel changes as well at other levels. So let's say McLaren win it and Ferrari don't. It does then that argument of learning from inexperience and mistakes also work for Ferrari?
Go on, Sam. I'll let you answer them.
I think it's an argument that works across the board, because I think and this isn't an F1 specific thing, this is a life specific thing.
We're getting deep.
Therefore, a general
Very
thing.
deep.
You learn far more from your mistakes than your successes. I know it's cliche, but you do. And part of maybe the I didn't maybe kind of dot the I's and cross the T's with my point in some ways of that will hold McLaren in very good stead for next season, because they can look back at this year and they can go, right, this is where things didn't go wrong. Yes, they've made mistakes maybe the first time of asking, but they probably won't make those mistakes again. And if they do, then that is completely on them. And yeah, Ian's absolutely right in terms of, this is a team that doesn't have that. Yes, it has the pedigree in the championship history, but it's a team that's learning on the fly, and they will go through those periods. So I think that is very much the case for McLaren, and I think it's the case for Ferrari as well. It's been so long; it's almost equivalent length of time since Ferrari have really had kind of any success of any measure in F1. You're absolutely right that both of them will take a lot from this championship, win or lose, because McLaren, they might win the constructors title, but they'll lose the drivers title. And maybe things have been bigged up a little bit. I agree with Ian completely. That's our job, to look at a championship and go, yes, it's slim, but it's still possible. So therefore it is a championship fight. I'm sorry if you feel like it's been overdone, but it was still possible. And if Max had retired from a race and Lando won it, and all of a sudden it's looking really close and we hadn't covered it, and we looked like we'd been taken by surprise and scrambling to be like, oh, there's a championship fight, we'd look silly. So yes, that's why that championship fight has been covered in that way. But I think McLaren will learn from those things. Lando will learn from those things. Ferrari likewise.
Something I just thought of, though, actually, in looking more at Ferrari, one big advantage I personally think McLaren have over Ferrari is McLaren obviously are already working with the drivers they'll have next season, obviously retaining their lineup in Lando and Oscar. Ferrari, of course, have, quite a big change coming for 2025. And of course, Carlos Sainz going to Williams. But Lewis Hamilton is arriving. With that in mind, of course, Ferrari, Ian, are going to want to be as well prepared as possible for Lewis's arrival, given the significance behind them signing a 7-time world champion. Lewis will be expecting an excellent car. So how do you think Ferrari balance fighting for the constructors' title in the final 3 races this year, but also looking ahead to next year and Lewis's arrival?
I think they'll be very easily splitting the two. Lewis isn't there yet. Okay, yes, they signed him back on, or the announcement was made on February 1st. Of course, they'd signed him at some point in January. But he's not there. He's not arrived. So whilst next year's car is, as we know, going to be pretty much the carryover, and that's probably one of the benefits, actually, that the car coming out of this season is going to be carried over into 2025, simply because every single team is going to be focused on 2026 and the new regulations. So that's one benefit that Ferrari's got. It's not going to be fundamentally changing the car going into next season. And it will come out of this season with a pretty good car, as we've seen. You've highlighted the point that it scored comfortably more points than McLaren or Red Bull coming out of the last triple header. We'll see how it performs over this coming triple header, but if it's up there again, then they are going to be very, very happy going into next season. Say very, very happy. They're going to be very, very happy with the car that they're going to have going into next season. If they miss out on the constructors' title, of course they're not going to be very, very happy. They're going to be desperately sad because they know how close they will have come this season. And for me, looking back on Ferrari's season just very briefly, barring that Spanish Grand Prix upgrade, which we know has been their denouement this year, has really undermined them, then they could arguably have been leading that championship by now. But this is a Formula One season. Ifs, ands, buts, maybes. You can always throw them back on any particular given campaign with the glorious vision of hindsight, of course. But that's just one of the points I'm making, as I say, with regard to Ferrari this season and that particular upgrade, that it just really undermined their campaign. But going forward into next season, as I say, it's compartmentalized. We finish this season. As soon as this season is done, whether we're first or second, maybe even third in the championship, I doubt they're going to finish third in all honesty. As soon as that season's done, right, now, full focus on 2025. What have we got to do to get Lewis comfortable in that car? Because ever since this regulatory era kicked in, Lewis has not been comfortable with these ground effect cars. So will Ferrari be able to give Lewis a car that he can compete with, number one, and then that which then will also allow Ferrari to compete again for next year's constructors' title? That's going to be one of the biggest question marks going into 2025. And of course, it's one we can't answer. But in terms of answering your question directly, compartmentalization, get this season done, full focus on 25.
Sticking with the Constructors' Championship, though, and looking a little bit further down into the midfield, and of course, what happened in Sao Paulo resulted in a pretty seismic switch in the midfield battle for P6. Of course, Alpine with a remarkable double podium, shot up from 9th to 6th, jumping Haas and RB. And Haas and RB, obviously, for those who are new to our podcast, RB being what we call Visa Cash App RB Red Bull sister team, but Haas and RB have enjoyed a very, very strong season, for a midfield team. Haas in particular, obviously, not working on the biggest of budgets, and actually it has worked wonders with its car and has performed consistently, particularly Nico Hulkenberg. But do you think, I read something recently, I can't remember who it was by, but saying how Alpine have kind of been nowhere this season, but have won remarkable race with the double podium, which has shot them up the standings and could end up being a significant financial boost come the end of the year should they finish P6. I read something that said that for Haas and RB, it was like one crazy race ruining an entire season's hard work. Sam, it does feel a little bit like that, because there's now, particularly on Haas, maybe not so RB, because of course they do have the Red Bull family, but for Haas, there's now pressure on these last 3 races, despite a tremendous season, in trying to get some more points to finish ahead of Alpine, because, finishing 6th instead of 7th or even 8th comes with such a financial benefit that for a team like Haas, looking ahead to next season with Ollie Behrman and Esteban Ocon coming in, would be absolutely massive for them.
I think in terms of the point about one race ruining a season, unfortunately, sometimes that's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
Conversely, had that not happened and Haas got sixth and pipped RB, we could look back at Nico Hulkenberg's sixth place finishes in Austria and Silverstone and go, well, look, 2 results made a season. So it works the other way. And that is, again, the ebbs and flows of an F1 season. The pendulum swings and you get momentum and you lose momentum, and that is just the dynamics of an F1 season. So yeah, I think that's very much the case there. And yeah, they will feel brutally aggrieved if Alpine get sixth and they even fall to seventh, let alone eighth. They're going to feel that one got away from us. RB will feel the same as well, because you look at how long they left Daniel in the car.
Yeah,
there will be an element of, if we'd put Liam in when Helmut Marko wanted to around Spain, could things have been different? Again, as Ian says, there's lots of what ifs and kind of what abouts, and it's hindsight is 2020. So yeah, I think I'm just pleased we have what is a really interesting fight in the midfield. I think we're going to see over the next few rounds Alpine having to really stretch to hold on to that position, because I don't think the car is quite where the RB and the Haas is at the moment. But yeah, we've got a really dynamic fight for sixth in the championship. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, it feels like I'm clutching at straws when there's so much entertainment further up, especially for the constructors title fight. But I'm going to be looking at that as well and going, there's so much at stake for those teams, especially where, as you say, when you talk about the money and how that can then trickle into the next era of F1, because it's setting these teams up for an entire new regulation change. And yes, this year and next year as well are so pivotal.
Yeah, that one race has now shone a spotlight on that particular battle. Before, it was looking like it was just going to be Haas and RB. Alpine were making bits of an improvement, but of course, it never looked like they were going to haul in that a massive points in one particular Grand Prix. But as Sam's pointed out, that's Formula One racing. You get one Grand Prix like that, and that's what a lot of teams within that midfield battle look for. It's that one anomalous result across a Grand Prix campaign that can set you up going into next season. That was a $29 million leap up the standings from 9th to 6th to Alpine. They've not secured it yet, of course, because there's only 5 points between Alpine, Haas, and RB. Any one of those three teams could end up in 6th, 7th, and 8th across those positions. It could ebb and flow over these course of these 3 Grand Prix. So as I say, that one race though shone the spotlight on those 3 teams, that midfield battle in particular, and just as much, not quite as much, obviously, because yes, our focus is more on who's going to win the constructors' title, but it has made for an interesting subplot with regard to this triple header now, up against what is the main storyline of McLaren, Ferrari, and Red Bull. We still can't count out Red Bull to a certain extent in the Constructors' Championship. Maybe Sergio Perez can do something miraculous this season that he's not done previously, and all of a sudden have the finish to the season bookending the start that he had to the season when he had 4 podiums in the first 5 Grand Prix. Personally, I don't see it, in all honesty. But stranger things have happened. Look at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix.
I feel for the TV directors who are going to have a horrible time trying to show both battles taking place. But I want to come with you actually with a point building on Alpine, because maybe I was a little harsh, but actually you mentioned it there. Alpine have made small gains in recent races, of course. Yeah. Sao Paulo obviously made it look significantly better than it has been with a double podium, but actually the underlying factor is Alpine have been improving. And what's interesting is a lot of these improvements have happened not only since Oliver Oakes came in as team principal replacing Bruno Famin, but more importantly, the return obviously of Flavio Briatore in May, obviously for those who are unaware, the former team principal of the outfit when it was known as Renault. And actually there was some really interesting quotes that came out from Flavio recently, in where he revealed that just since he came in May, the team has reduced by 300 people, which is an extraordinary number. But it does show as well what's interesting. He was saying that they're trying to make the team base less on the offices and more on the racetrack. How it used to be was kind of along his lines, or I guess maybe looking back to the glory days of when he led the team, obviously to 2 championships with Fernando Alonso in 05 and 06. But it does feel like these leadership changes, we speak about teams undergoing personnel changes and things happening behind the scenes, but actually there's perhaps more happening at Alpine. Also looking ahead to 2026, of course. It looks like Alpine and Flavio in particular are very, very busy right now to try and get the team back towards 5th, 4th, maybe even 3rd in a couple of years.
Yeah, I think one of the key points about Flavio is, of course, I remember speaking to somebody, and I'm obviously not going to give the name away because it was an off-the-record conversation, and we were discussing Flavio and him coming back into Formula One, and of course, Flavio will always have the stigma attached to him around the 08 Singapore Grand Prix and his role then as team principal and the Crashgate saga, of course. Yeah. And naturally, there were, as I say, these question marks around him. Should he be back? After all this time, why is he back? But somebody said to me that Flavio is one of the shrewdest operators you are ever likely to encounter. He knows how to get a Formula One team performing at its best, particularly behind the scenes. And that comment that you've made there, that 300 jobs have been stripped away, pretty much across the team, it's gone from 1,100 to 800. Pretty much Flavio must have taken one look at this company and thought, there's a lot of dead wood here. We need to strip this away now and get back to a way of working that we know is going to help this team be performant again. And what's perhaps been quite remarkable is that the short period of time in which those changes have been able to have an effect on the racetrack. Yeah, of course, there was always going to be an element of bearing in mind where Alpine were at the start of the season, which was pretty much rock bottom. They came into this nowhere. A company of that size will always make its way slowly upwards, but certainly in recent races, that car has at least shown that it is worthy of its place in the midfield fight alongside especially Haas and RB and occasionally Williams when it is able to get its act together. Aston Martin, meanwhile, yeah, just a footnote on this season in many respects. And we've seen Pierre Gasly before the Sao Paulo Grand Prix qualifying in the top 10 on merit in both the United States and Mexico City. And you thought, okay, this is looking good. Is it just anomalous, to use that word again, as used previously in this podcast? But no, Alpine most definitely showed it had a worthy and worthwhile race car pretty much across both conditions, in the dry and in the wet, in Sao Paulo. And fair play to what Flavio, Oliver Oaks has done, and everything and anything else that's gone on behind the scenes at that team, because right now, to give it its due and fair credit, yes, whilst that result in Sao Paulo was quite extraordinary and the points haul was unbelievable, bearing in mind what had been achieved previously over the first 20 races of this season, nevertheless, it has now thrust itself into that midfield battle and given itself a respectable chance of finishing in that what would be a coveted 6th position compared to where it was previously for the majority of this campaign.
And what's also quite interesting about the Alpine example is when you look at Haas as well, that they've, and I remember we were talking about this early in the year, does the Haas model still fit modern day Formula One? And this year they've shown that it can do. If you get the right person at the helm, that streamlined, agile approach can be really, really effective. And this, for me, feels like Alpine making steps towards that in terms of we can again course correct much more easily with a smaller, more agile operation. They've taken away some of that bloat and you see it in the corporate world as well. Sometimes you get kind of paralysis almost because there's too many people there. There's too many cooks in the kitchen to move in the direction you need to. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing with Alpine. They're taking out, as Ian says, the deadwood, and they're allowing the team to move forward in the trajectory it needs to.
What's really interesting on there actually is that you look at Haas being a customer team. Obviously, Alpine in 2026 will become a customer team as well. The team currently at the bottom of the pecking order and the standings is Stake, Sauber, obviously, who are becoming Audi in 2026, and obviously are gaining more personnel, going to become obviously a works team going the complete opposite direction in terms of, you'd imagine, the way of working compared to Alpine and Haas. And of course, having out Sam Gabriel Bortoleto as Nico Hulkenberg's teammate for next season. I mean, you're an F2 lover. You follow the series religiously. I mean, do you think it's a good move? Because actually, when you look at the rookies we're going to have on the grid next season, Bortoleto is by far, in terms of F1 experience, the most inexperienced.
He is, but he's also, if you look at the rookies coming through, so, Jack Doohan didn't win the F2 title, nor did Ollie Behrman, nor did Liam Lawson didn't even win a feature race in F2. Colapinto had half a season in F2. And so you go, Kimi Antonelli, again, he's had 1 year in F2, and yes, he's looked really good, but he skipped F3 altogether. Bortoleto has the potential to go back to back with F3, F2 titles. So he's done everything you need to do to get to F1. And you look at the previous three drivers who have managed to do that, Charles Leclerc, George Russell, and Oscar Piastri, he's in pretty good company. So, yeah, I have no concerns about Gabriel Bortoleto. I mean, the rule of numbers, rule of averages, dictates that at least one or two of those guys are going to kind of maybe fall short or struggle. The last time we had a kind of a rookie class, 2023, one of them lasted, 10, 11 rounds? One of them lasted 37 races, and the other one's already won a couple of Grand Prix. So you're going to get very different kind of results for these guys. I saw someone refer to Jack Doohan as a Nepo baby, which I thought was incredibly harsh.
Wow.
Given this, well, exactly, I know it's mad to me, and I think we are so reliant on these results and kind of saying, "Oh, has a driver earned it?" And in the same breath, they're saying, "Well, Colapinto, Lawson, you've got some great talent." Yeah, but if you look at Colapinto and Lawson's junior categories, they haven't earned it in that same way. So I think it's very difficult to know how someone's going to adapt when they get to F1. You're absolutely right in terms of he doesn't have the F1 experience. I do think Sauber have absolutely made the right choice in elevating a rookie. I personally would have been happy with either Teo Porcher or Colapinto in that seat as well. I think Gabriel Bortoleto is the best option out of those three, though, however. So yeah, I'm perfectly happy. I think he'll show that he has got it. There's a reason why McLaren had him in their stable, and McLaren haven't really had all too much of a junior academy over the last few years. It hasn't really been where their focus has lied. Lies. Yeah, God, when you talk for so long, you end up, kind of. But yeah, so I'm perfectly happy with Gabriel Bortoleto. I think he's the right choice, and yeah, there's, again, to use Ian's whataboutisms and what ifs. It's so difficult to know how these guys are going to fare, but yeah, I think he's done everything he needs to do to show that he will be ready.
How much risk, though, Ian, do you think that Bortoletto's taken? Because as you mentioned earlier on, we're widely expecting that the cars next season will be very similar to what we see at the end of this season. Of course, Stake, Sauber have been, to put it politely, nowhere this season. Of course, bottom of the standings, don't look set to rise any higher than bottom. And of course, likely going to have a very difficult car next season. With it being so important for rookies to impress and show their talent, do you think Bortoleto is necessarily going to get the best chance to do that and, I guess, impress the big teams, given that he's going to be likely with a team racing at the back of the grid?
He's got nothing to lose, has he?
True.
He's going to be coming into the 2025 season as an F3 champion, potentially as an F2 champion. 4.5 point lead, Sam, over
Isaac Hadjar.
Isaac Hadjar. 2 rounds to go, 2 sprints, 2 feature races to go in those 2 rounds in Qatar and Abu Dhabi. So he could go back to back. And, going into that team, unlike Kimi Antonelli at Mercedes, for argument's sake, Gabriel's got, as I said, nothing to lose. The spotlight's not going to be on him too much. Not much, I don't think, will be expected of him, except to show that he's a worthwhile, capable driver. Only when it transitions into Audi in 2026 will I think that focus and spotlight become greater, because at least then he will have had a year of learning under his belt, a transitional year in many respects, to get used to Formula One, get used to the people around him, get used to the ways of working. Obviously, he's built up a good, solid relationship so far with Mattia Binotto. He will then have to do that with Jonathan Wheatley, who will become the new team principal about May or June of next year, we're led to believe. But obviously, Jonathan apparently had an input with regard to Gabriel's appointment, according to Mattia. So at least there will be a level of understanding there. But obviously, yes, as I say, a year under his belt, it will undoubtedly, a year under his belt without being in that as harsh a spotlight as Kimi Antonelli will be, for argument's sake, at Mercedes, that year will stand in enormous stead going into 2026. So I think in many respects it's a good choice by Stake. They could have gone with the 2 experienced hands. Yes, they'd signed Nico. They could have rehired Valtteri on another contract, and they could have gone with those 2 experienced guys. But I think when you're looking to build for something beyond 25, you've got to look at someone like Gabriel and what he has achieved so far. And for me, Mattia has made a very, very good choice here.
And of course, for those who are watching this video on YouTube, as always, with anything we discuss, let us know in the comment section below what you think on Stake Sauber hiring Boretto. Final talking point, and something a bit different, which we don't speak about very often, and perhaps do need to speak about more often, is women in motorsport. And of course, we're recording this podcast on Monday, the 11th of November. Last week for women in motorsport and the FIA, a pretty significant week. It was announced on last Thursday, that F1 Academy will fund a full GB3 season for the winner of F1 Academy this season, which looks set to be Abby Pulling, who has a massive 95-point lead. F1 Academy will fund the 2025 full season in GB3 as well as 20 test days. And of course, last Friday, for those who are unaware, Formula E hosted the first ever all-female test to be hosted by an FIA championship using the brand new Gen 3 Evo machinery, which is the fastest accelerating FIA single-seater ever, 0 to 60 miles per hour in 1.82 seconds.
That, doesn't he?
30% faster than a current F1 car. But Ian, I want to come to you on this because you've been in this industry for a long time. You've seen a lot of change happen. Not only, obviously, last season, of course, for this year, F1 Academy funded Marta Garcia in Freca. Formula Regional, of course, isn't quite the step up that GB3 is, for example, with a much more powerful, faster machinery, but also with the FIA in the first ever all-female test. How big a step is this for women in motorsport?
It's massively significant. I mean, we had W Series, brilliant concept, to finally push female drivers forward in motorsport. Unfortunately, didn't quite work out. It eventually went bankrupt, as we know. But at least then Formula One stepped in and has now taken on that platform to another level. Every single F1 Academy race now takes place across a Formula One Grand Prix weekend. So that offers that spotlight for those women to step into and prove themselves, to show what they're capable of. And we've seen with Abby, she's had a tremendous season. And of all the female drivers that have come through over the years, for me, from what I've seen and have learned and understood, and just to give people an idea, I do an interview a month with one of the F1 Academy drivers. I've been doing that over the course of this past year. Fascinating backstories, what they've been through. Just as hard in pretty much every single respect, if not harder, for many of the male drivers, because it's attracting funding. you hit a certain level in motorsport, and then you've got to step up again with this huge amount of funding to get them through. And so all these females have encountered huge difficulties to get where they've got to, even now into F1 Academy. So for F1 Academy now to grant the winner this great funding prize and push that person forward, and as you say, almost certainly it's going to be Abby Pulling into GB3, then we will get a better idea as to how good Abby is. But I know from what you saw on Friday, Nick, in that FE test, that Abby has potentially got an eye on an FE seat, maybe on 26, because she impressed superbly. Just give us from what you saw, Nick, on that particular day.
I mean, she was, and so was several. Just to give an idea, some of the drivers that were there were the likes of Abby Pullen, there was Jamie Chadwick, there was Bianca Bustamante, Tatiana Calderon. There were drivers there. And what was really interesting, it was female drivers of different ages, different abilities, some who have been around and driven so many different things, and some who are just at the start of their career, which was really fascinating to see them all come together. And yeah, the test took place at the end of what was formerly pre-season testing. So to put a bit of context into it, by the time that the women's test happened, the Formula E drivers, the official 22 men, had been driving the Jarama circuit just north of Madrid for 18 hours across 6 3-hour sessions. The women, who majority had not been able to do any simulator sessions using Jarama because it was a last minute change from Valencia to Jarama, some managed to use the video game Assetto Corsa just to get an idea of what the circuit was like. Jumping into the cars, which from F4 to FE machinery is a humongous jump. It is very, very different. It's groove tyres. Nothing is similar in its electric power as well. Abby jumped in for the 3-hour session and topped it, but not only topped it, she was only 3.5 seconds off the fastest time from the official preseason test, which was topped by Mitch Evans, who has been in Formula E for several years, has fought for the championship across the last few seasons, has 111 FE starts to his name. Abby, who had never driven an FE car, only had a couple of simulator sessions, and goes and beats 3.5 seconds off that time in just 3 hours, is remarkable. And she was representing Nissan. Having spoken to Nissan afterwards, the engineers were taken aback by how professional she was, but also how understanding. She was asking, as she put to herself, millions of questions. She was asking, as she put it, the stupid questions as well. But Nissan weren't treating them as stupid. They were actually informing her on everything. And there were several drivers there who loved the cars, and Abby in particular caught the eye. And I would not be too surprised to see her back in an FE car doing something very, very soon. And of course, a big thing that's happening with Formula E for the Gen 4 era, which comes in at the end of 2026, is power steering, which actually could be a big stepping stone to hopefully getting a female driver on the grid. And on that note, I think that's a perfect moment to bring this episode of the Racing News 365 podcast to an end. If you have enjoyed it and are watching it on YouTube, be sure to please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's been amazing to see more and more of you subscribing to the channel, so please keep doing so. And hey, let's see if we can hit 15,000 subscribers before the end of the season. That would be quite a nice early Christmas present. From Sam, Ian and I, this has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast. We will see you later. Bye.
As always, take care, folks.
Thanks for joining us.